Welcome everyone, you're watching Conversations with Alanki. Today I will be in conversation with Nayana Mawilmada. He is the president of the property sector of John Keells Group.
The only fully integrated project in the country and really in the region. So we think it's really just going to elevate the profile overall. I think apartments are very stable. So Trizen was really about how do you create kind of Colombo lifestyle 2.0. And if you look back the last couple of decades, you see Colombo's skyline has completely changed. And what's kind of interesting is there's been kind of projects that John Keells Properties has done that have actually punctuated this. And now if you look at the skyline of Colombo, it's actually quite a nice city.
It really is. Right? It looks different.
It looks very different.
Welcome everyone, you're watching Conversations with Alanki. Sri Lanka's real estate landscape is changing rapidly, and it would be right to say that the John Keells Group has played a pivotal role in providing elevated living spaces and experiences to both homeowners and investors. Today I will be in conversation with Nayana Mawilmada. He is the president of the property sector of John Keells Group. Now, in his current role as president of the property sector of John Keells Group, he has overseen the development of revolutionary projects in Sri Lanka. Welcome.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you for being a part of this conversation. So my first question is, you had a remarkable career across urban development, policy and planning. Tell us about your journey. What brought you to John Keells Group and what inspires you?
Well, having worked quite a bit of my life overseas, coming home was really about what can you make of Sri Lanka and what kind of impact you can have. And of course, John Keells was attractive because of the sheer scale of what we can actually do. I think a lot of the stuff we're looking at is transformative for the city and for the country, and I think that really is what's drawn me to it.
All right. John Keells Properties talks about creating new worlds, and I think this is very inspiring because nowadays people look for more than just building blocks, but rather elevated experiences. How does this theme inspire the work you do across these projects?
Look, to me, this whole ethos of creating new worlds is actually a big deal. It's why we do what we do, right? I feel, when we do things and you have the kind of the canvas of like a John Keells, really the question is not how do you create another concrete box. Question is how do you create like transformative change in a city?
Absolutely.
And creating new worlds is about really being the front runner in it and being bold enough to redefine how something should be. So in the housing space, it's really about what is the future of urban living. And a lot of what we do is about thinking 5-10 years ahead and saying, look, what is the future going to be like? How do we create that future? And how do you create a holistic experience around that future, right? So, and a lot of the projects we do are in that vein. It's really about redefining how people can experience a city or redefine how people can live their life.
When you talk about redefining a living experience, I think cinema and life at City of Dreams really stands out in John Keells' property portfolio. It's more than just a building, it's an integrated experience.
Absolutely.
Tell us about this. What can investors, residents, and the region expect?
Yeah, so cinema life is actually a very good example. If anybody walks into it, you kind of do realize you're in a bit of another world, right?
Right.
It's the most ambitious project, private sector project ever done in Sri Lanka by any measure. Over $1 billion we've spent on it. But it's also probably the largest project of this nature in the entire South Asia region. And it's got so many elements to it: residential, office, a mall, a massive, actually 2 hotels within the building, gaming areas and so on. But it's that's only the tip of it. The reality of it is it's kind of redefining what's a modern face of Sri Lanka. What are we in the 21st century? How do we kind of announce our presence on the world stage? And how do you bring a kind of immersive experience? How do you bring architecture to the next level? And how do you take local elements and reinterpret that, right? So Cinnamon Life is bold in its vision and saying, look, here's what Colombo of tomorrow can be like, right? And
Absolutely.
it's a very, very bold step. So that's a very good example, actually.
So Nayana, what kind of impact would Cinnamon Life really have for Sri Lanka?
We think transformative. It's the objective is really to take tourism to the next level. We've got huge MICE capacity for about 5,000 people, 800-room hotel, a casino coming in, all these different elements that.
It's really a larger than life experience.
It is larger than life, but it's also quite unique, right? So we do expect with what the offering we have that we can elevate the presence of Sri Lanka tourism to another level, get a new kind of tourist coming in. We have capacity constraints in Colombo for MICE events. And that with Cinnamon Life coming in, I think that will completely change. And the level of and the caliber of tourists coming in, will elevate quite a bit. At the same time, we've got the 2 residence towers and then office towers. So we've got a 250,000 square foot office, which is, probably one of the nicest office buildings in the city, integrated into this whole thing. And the residences, which are also plugged in. So it's really the only fully integrated project in the country and really in the region. So we think it's really just going to elevate the profile overall.
And I think Cinnamon Life at City of Dreams really is an example of creating new worlds.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about apartments as investments, because many people see apartments as just living spaces or homes. What does it look like as an investment?
I think it's of course, I have rose-tinted glasses because I'm in this business. But I think apartments are a very stable investment, right? Mm-hmm. And if you look at, for example, in a context like Sri Lanka, the question is, where do you invest? And real estate over the last several decades has been kind of a stable asset class, right? So we had massive volatility, for example, in the markets in Sri Lanka, massive inflation. Real estate markets have really kind of adjusted to it, right? So it's kind of if you do it right, it's a safe place to keep your money, gives you steady yield, and you always get kind of, not always, but almost always get upside because you're looking at a land-constrained city with a growing population and a kind of increasing need for housing. So it tends to grow rapidly or grow steadily with a yield potential as well as a capital appreciation potential on the money you invest, right? And I'd say 3 years ago, when inflation was hitting 50-60%, people thought real estate prices would not adjust. They fully adjusted now. People who invested in this building, for example, probably doubled the money.
So it's a good investment.
I think so. But again, as I said, they have rose-tinted glasses on them.
All right. Let's talk about Trizen. I mean, what does Trizen offer to someone who wants to live in the heart of the city?
So Trizen was also about creating new worlds, right? So Trizen was really about how do you create kind of Colombo lifestyle 2.0, really. It was quite dramatic as a step forward in terms of, one, we got an exceptionally good location. But the question was, how do you create a product that's different than anything else out there? Hyper efficient, very dense. We've got 897 apartments, in this building on 1.5 acres of land. But the question is, why do that? There's a kind of social side to this. For us, Sri Lanka has to get urbanized and has to get densified to save land. So if we were to do this in single family houses, take 65 acres. We've got it all packed into one really interesting building, but it's It's also kind of stripping away things that are not essential and trying to distill what do people actually need in a community of this nature, right? So it's efficient apartments, putting all kinds of amenities in, all kinds of services in to support it, like from EV chargers to a couple of gyms to gaming rooms to badminton courts to all of this stuff packed into a really interesting development with an exceptional location. So it was really about thinking, okay, what is the next generation of urban dweller in Colombo going to need?
So really an elevated experience.
Absolutely. And it's a new world.
Creating a new world.
It really is. It really is.
Really living by the word.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Viman. That's your latest project in Ja-Ela. What kind of living experience are you trying to create in the suburbs?
Okay, so Viman was a very interesting one because we conceived of Viman in the middle of the economic crisis.
Right.
And we saw that Sri Lanka was struggling. We saw the people were struggling to be able to afford housing, to kind of come into the city. The cost structures were very, very high. And we were also trying to understand what is preventing people, what is holding people back from moving from houses into apartments. And then we realized what's missing is this sense of place and this transition from grass under your feet to kind of a much more contained living experience. And I think people were also having trouble with identity. So in a way, Viman to us was creating new worlds on different footing. It was, how do you redefine what suburban living could be, but not single family detached suburban? What can that be? And how can you distill elements of a truly Sri Lankan community? What does it mean to be a Sri Lankan community? What are the elements that make our community special? So we got lots of inspiration from villagers and village lifestyles and how children play, and tried to create a safe, enclosed kind of community where people can be open. So rather than confining people in 6 perched lots where they don't interact, create a community where people can really interact. Lots of landscapes, lots of gardens, lots of really interesting elements within an environment where people can be free. So it was really trying to bring that back. So,
do you think more people are considering moving into apartments nowadays? Because there's a certain mindset that some people have that they prefer to live in houses as opposed to apartments, but this could be a misconception. It could be due to lack of information.
We are way behind the curve on this compared to the rest of the world, right? So we have about 10% of our people in Colombo living in apartments. You might not believe it, but that's actually all it is. In parallel cities, say around the world, it's easily north of 50%. You take a city like Singapore, it's like 95%.
10% in Sri Lanka.
10% is Sri Lanka. So there's only one way it can actually go. And you're right, it's a kind of cultural so we think this is inevitable. Question is, why is it being held back? And part of it is kind of a cultural transition. It's a social transition. As I was talking about with Viman, it's like, we're kind of a grass under our feet people, but we can't sustain that anymore. Right? I mean, you ask your mother, you ask my mother, they'll have a much harder time than you.
I mean, I think nowadays people are looking for luxury, but also comfort and convenience and a sense of community.
Absolutely. And the thing is, it's just not viable for most people now. Build cost is high.
Right.
The process of build out is really complicated. You'd be hard pressed to find somebody who can actually design and supervise your building while you're going to work and managing it. But once you go in, your cost structure is higher as well, right? You've got to deal with your garden, you've got to deal with what for maintenance, you've got security issues, right? And even then, question of land availability, right? People live way out and come into Colombo every day. So, for us, the question of this transition is an inevitability. It's a social transformation that is happening already.
Right.
And for us, the challenge is, how do you curate that and how do you make it go in a rational, meaningful way? That's kind of the way we see it.
So what would you say is the biggest misconception people have about apartment living?
I think people think it's too confining. People think it's expensive, inaccessible. It's actually, in some ways, cheaper because most of what you need is kind of taken care of. It's like a hassle-free sort of lifestyle. And I think once people make that move, they very rarely go back. People hesitate to kind of leave their garden and leave their house and move in. But once they realize how convenient it is, very few people actually go back. So it's a social transit. Right? People don't realize the convenience that it brings. And I think that'll generationally change as well. I think the younger generation is far less hesitant than an older generation.
And like we discussed earlier, Nayana, I think people nowadays want more than just a building block, more than just four walls. They want an experience, something that adds value to their life. How does John Keells ensure that this happens?
So that's a
I mean,
question.
obviously, I can see that there's so much thought that has gone into creating these living spaces.
Yeah. So I like to think of it as, we don't build buildings. We build communities.
Sure.
Anybody can build a concrete box, honestly. It's not that complicated to build a concrete box. The question is, how do you create an entire experience? How do you create an entire lifestyle around a concrete box? That, I think, is a challenge. So we spend a lot of time, actually. So if you look at each of our projects, we don't do small projects, right? So we do it at a scale where you really can create community. And you really go after this whole concept of what does it mean to live here? And you look at all of the aspects that come around the concrete box, which makes it more interesting, makes it more challenging, makes it much more immersive.
So, Nayana, you've been in this space for a while. You're into real estate and you know the subject. What do you see for Colombo in the future?
I think change that most people can't fathom. I think if you look at what's happened in Colombo, say, over the last 25 years, it's a completely changed place. And I see this, for example, when I bring my parents up who live in Kandy. After a long time, they're like, oh God, we can't understand what this place has become. It's
really
completely
changed.
And if you look back the last couple of decades, you see Colombo's skyline has completely changed. And what's kind of interesting is there's been kind of projects that John Keells Properties has done that have actually punctuated this. And now if you look at the skyline of Colombo, it's actually quite a nice city.
It really is.
Right?
It looks different.
It looks very different. It looks, it's changing. So I think this trend that we talked about of kind of more apartment type housing coming in is going to happen. I think there's going to be more high rises in the center of the city. Eventually we will get mass transit, right? And we'll make Colombo a hub town. That will eventually happen. But I think lifestyles will completely change. I think this transformation from people living in houses to people living in apartments, I think in the next couple of decades, we're just going to see it.
So you're saying it's inevitable?
It is inevitable, but I also think we're going to drive that change.
All right.
Because a lot of stuff that we are planning and we have on our drawing boards now are going to be transformational for the city. That's just like the projects of the past.
And finally, where do you see real estate in Sri Lanka heading?
Up?
Sure.
No, the reason is, as I mentioned before, a couple of fundamentals, right? One, we are fundamentally a land-constrained city, right? So there is this transition that is happening in Sri Lanka from single-family housing to multi-family, apartment style housing. It's an inevitable transition. It's happening in practically every country on the planet that's progressed, right? So it will happen. So that whoever gets in has the potential of that upside. But there's also kind of other pressures coming in with, for example, commute times being increasingly difficult. Again, people moving closer to the city is an inevitability which is going to drive up values. The other interesting one to watch is how does Sri Lanka do over the next decade or two in positioning itself as kind of a Singapore to Southeast Asia, China, Hong Kong to China sort of hub place where we become an anchor point for the region, right? Because right now our expat population is a very, very tiny sliver.
Sure.
As soon as you start seeing that number going up, you're going to see rents and values going tremendously high. So I feel there's domestic forces that are clearly going to move this market. clearly going to move this market. But that's going to just get on steroids if we start getting an influx of modest numbers. Even if we get 2,000 expats moving into Colombo, you're going to take up all the apartments in Colombo practically, right? So it just goes. There's a way.
All right. I really do think that John Keells Properties has redefined the real estate landscape in Sri Lanka and like you said, created new worlds for everyone. I mean, for investors and for homeowners. So is there any message you'd like to share with the audience watching this?
Well, that's a good question. Look, I think the key message I would say is take a look at what options are available in the real estate market. I think there's a lot going on, and I think that general buzz you see is quite positive, and people are starting to realize that this transition is happening. So I would really just tell people to embrace what is inevitable future of Sri Lanka, of Colombo in particular, and invest now. That's what I would say.
All right. Thank you very much for this conversation. I was truly wonderful having this conversation. I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. We did speak about how John Keells Properties has redefined the meaning of luxury living and also redefining living spaces and elevating experiences for everyone. Thanks for watching. I'll be back with a new episode. Until then, stay safe and take care.